The streets of Manila were alive with the usual rush of traffic, honking cars, and the hum of busy pedestrians. Eduardo Ramos, a young Filipino man with a heart full of hope and a pocket full of struggle, zipped through the crowded streets on his old motorcycle, racing toward a job interview he had dreamed about for months. This was his big chance, the opportunity to escape the cycle of temp jobs and make a life for himself. He had studied every detail of the company, prepared his answers meticulously, and rehearsed his pitch over and over again. This was it. But as Eduardo maneuvered through the traffic, his attention was drawn to a woman standing beside a stalled luxury car, the hazard lights flashing in a sea of impatient vehicles. She was well-dressed, her sharp appearance and expensive car making her stand out even more against the backdrop of the busy street. Nobody had stopped to help her. Eduardo, torn between his burning desire to make it to the interview on time and his instinct to help, hesitated. Should he ignore her, keep rushing toward his future, or should he stop and lend a hand, even if it meant risking everything? He knew what it would cost him, but he couldn't drive away. So he stopped. What he didn't know was that by helping this woman, he wasn't just changing his day. He was about to change his life in ways he could never have imagined. Manila's streets were as chaotic as always, filled with the endless hum of vehicles and people going about their busy lives. Eduardo Ramos gripped the handlebars of his motorcycle, weaving through the traffic, his thoughts focused solely on the upcoming job interview. It was his chance to break free from the endless cycle of dead-end jobs. For months he had prepared, studying the company, researching its values, and rehearsing his answers to the toughest questions. This was more than just an interview. It was a lifeline, a chance to finally make something of himself. The company he was interviewing with, Varela Technologies, was one of the fastest-growing tech firms in Manila, and the position he was applying for was highly coveted. Eduardo had worked tirelessly, taking up every odd job he could find, just to afford the bus ride to interviews, to buy a decent shirt for his meeting, to make sure he at least looked the part. As the city buzzed around him, Eduardo's mind raced with thoughts of what this opportunity could bring. If he got the job, he could escape the cycle of menial work, start saving, maybe even rent a place of his own, things that had always seemed out of reach. But as he neared his destination, something unexpected happened. Ahead of him, a black sports car was stalled in the middle of the street, its hazard lights blinking. Traffic was piling up behind it, and the impatient honking of horns echoed through the busy road. Eduardo could see a woman standing beside the car, looking distressed, her phone pressed to her ear as she paced back and forth. She looked like she was waiting for someone, anyone, to help. Eduardo's gut instinct screamed at him to ignore it, to keep going, to stay on course. He had been waiting for this interview for far too long. But as he watched the woman, something in him couldn't turn away. It wasn't just her desperation, but the clear helplessness in her eyes that made him hesitate. No one else was stopping to help her, and he knew if he didn't, she might be stranded there for a long time. A wave of indecision washed over him, and his thoughts started to spiral. The interview was the opportunity of a lifetime. His future depended on it. But then again, helping someone in need had always been a part of who he was. As he gripped the handlebars tighter, Eduardo made a split-second decision. He wasn't the type of person to turn his back on someone in need, even if it meant missing the job that could change his life. He steered his motorcycle toward the woman, not knowing that this seemingly small decision would lead him into an encounter that would change everything. Eduardo parked his motorcycle beside the luxury car, its sleek black frame gleaming under the Manila sun. The woman stood a few feet away, her hands gripping the phone tightly, her brows furrowed in frustration. She was tall, dressed in an immaculate suit that looked far more expensive than anything Eduardo had ever worn, and her expression, at first glance, radiated both authority and irritation. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say, the weight of his decision to stop pressing on him. He glanced at his watch. He was already running late. But as he took a deep breath, he pushed aside his anxiety and approached her. "Excuse me, miss," Eduardo said, his voice steady but carrying a trace of uncertainty. "Looks like you're having some trouble." She looked up, her gaze sharp and assessing, pausing for a second before her eyes flicked over him. A young man on a weathered motorcycle, wearing a simple jacket, his hands rough from years of hard work. He didn't fit the profile of someone who could solve her problem. But the desperation in her eyes softened for a split second, and then she sighed. "I've called roadside assistance, but they're taking forever," she replied, her tone cool, though tinged with frustration. "I don't think I can wait much longer." Eduardo nodded, glancing at the car, his mind racing through the possibilities. He wasn't a mechanic, but years of tinkering with his own broken-down bikes had given him enough skills to recognize a simple issue when he saw one. He stepped closer to the car. "You sure you want to wait for them?" he asked, gesturing to the flow of traffic that was now backing up behind her. "You're blocking the whole street." Her gaze flicked to the busy road, the reality of her situation hitting her in full force. She dropped her phone into her purse, her face hardening. There was no other option. She needed help. "Fine," she said reluctantly. "I don't know what else to do." Without waiting for permission, Eduardo moved toward the hood of the car. His hands worked quickly, pulling up the latch and lifting it open. The engine hummed, but there was something off about it. As he scanned the interior, his eyes fell on the loose battery terminal. It was a simple fix, one that could get the car running again with just a few adjustments. "You've got a loose battery connection," he said, wiping his brow as sweat dripped down his face from the heat of the day. "Give me a minute." He didn't wait for a response. With practiced hands, Eduardo tightened the connection, working as fast as he could, his mind still circling back to his interview, the clock ticking away. The noise of the city faded into the background as Eduardo focused on the task. Moments later, he stood back, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Try it now." The woman slid into the driver's seat, hesitated for a moment, and then pressed the start button. The engine rumbled back to life with a low hum. She exhaled in relief, though her face quickly regained its usual composure. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter this time. There was a shift in her tone, an acknowledgement of his effort. But Eduardo didn't feel that sense of accomplishment just yet. He glanced at his watch again. The interview was slipping further out of reach with every passing second. He had hoped for a miracle, a way to make it to the meeting on time. But now it seemed impossible. "You're welcome," he muttered, his voice carrying the weight of his disappointment. He turned back toward his bike, ready to leave. The interview was lost. But just as he was about to start the engine, the woman called out to him. "You were on your way somewhere important, weren't you?" Her voice was steady, but there was an undertone of something more. Eduardo exhaled, shaking his head, a bitter smile on his lips. "Not anymore," he said, his heart heavy. It was over. He had thrown away his chance at something better. He felt the weight of it settle in. But before he could mount his motorcycle and leave, something unexpected happened. The woman, without a word, reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek business card. She pressed it into his palm firmly. "Call me," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Eduardo stared at the card for a moment, barely glancing at the name printed in gold letters. Clara Varela, CEO of Varela Technologies. He stuffed the card into his pocket without a second thought, his mind still wrapped in the shock of missing the interview. "I don't need it," he said, though there was no real conviction in his voice. But Clara's gaze was unwavering. "Just call me," she repeated. And with that, she slid into her car and drove off, disappearing into the stream of traffic. Eduardo stood there, lost in the bustle of the city, feeling the heaviness of his lost opportunity. Little did he know, the woman he had helped was about to change the course of his life, just as he had unknowingly changed hers. The next morning, the weight of Eduardo's decision still hung over him like a heavy cloud. He lay in bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling of his small apartment. The room felt even smaller today, as if the walls were closing in on him. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, vibrating insistently. He knew it was probably an email from Varela Technologies, but he didn't need to check. He already knew what it would say. He had missed the interview. He had missed his shot. With a deep sigh, Eduardo reached for the phone and unlocked it, his fingers shaking as he swiped across the screen. "Thank you for your application," the message began. "Unfortunately, we have decided to move forward with other candidates." His chest tightened as the words hit him, but it wasn't new. He had expected this. The opportunity that had seemed so certain was gone, slipping away like sand through his fingers. He tossed the phone onto the bed, feeling the familiar sting of disappointment. He had let himself down, let down his family, and most of all, let down the dream that had been driving him for so long. Eduardo turned over onto his side, his eyes fixated on the corner of the room. His mind replayed the moment he helped Clara Varela with her car, the decision he had made to stop and offer help. He couldn't deny it now, the choice felt like a mistake. A simple act of kindness, and he had thrown away his only chance for a better future. But then, as if to challenge his disappointment, the small business card Clara had given him the day before caught his eye from the nightstand. He reached for it, turning it over in his fingers. He hadn't even looked at it properly before, too focused on his ruined interview. Clara Varela, CEO of Varela Technologies. A chill ran down his spine. Was this some kind of joke? Why would a CEO hand a business card to a guy like him? And why had she given it to him at all? He hadn't even finished his interview. He hadn't even been close. Eduardo stared at the number on the card, his thumb hovering above it. Should he even bother calling? Was this just a sympathy gesture? A token of gratitude for helping her? It wasn't charity he wanted. He didn't need a handout. But something inside him pushed him forward. Maybe it wasn't pity. Maybe it was something else, something real. He had nothing to lose. With a breath that felt like it might be his last before taking a leap, Eduardo dialed the number. His heart pounded in his chest as the phone rang. Twice, then 3 times before a calm voice picked up. "Hello, Eduardo. This is Clara Varela." Her voice was firm, professional, but there was something else in it. A hint of something he couldn't quite place. I didn't get the job," Eduardo said, his words stumbling over each other. "I missed the interview." There was a brief silence on the other end, and then Clara spoke again, her tone surprisingly matter-of-fact. "Did you think I gave you that card out of pity?" she asked, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. Eduardo didn't know how to respond. He had assumed as much. He had only helped her with a flat battery. It wasn't enough to change the course of his life, was it? Clara continued, her voice more direct now. "I want you to come to my office. Right now." "Wait, what?" Eduardo blinked, disbelief flooding his mind. "But I didn't even." "It doesn't matter," she interrupted. "Come to my office. Now. You'll know why when you get here." Before he could say anything else, the line went dead. Eduardo stood there in stunned silence, the phone still pressed to his ear. Did she just hang up on him? What kind of CEO was this? Why would she invite him to her office after everything had gone wrong? He didn't have time to question it any further. His heart was pounding in his chest, and before he could think twice, he grabbed his jacket and hurried out the door. 20 minutes later, Eduardo found himself standing in the sleek, modern lobby of Varela Technologies, the company he had dreamed of working for. He stood at the reception desk, feeling out of place in the shiny marble space, surrounded by well-dressed professionals who seemed like they belonged. The receptionist, a woman with perfectly styled hair and a look of detached professionalism, didn't seem to recognize his name when he mentioned it. She raised an eyebrow, then picked up the phone. "Mr. Ramos," she said, her voice laced with curiosity. "Miss Varela is expecting you. Right this way." Confused, Eduardo followed her to the elevator, his heart racing with every step. Was this a mistake? Was Clara really expecting him? As the elevator doors opened to the top floor, he was led to a sleek, glass-walled office that seemed to command the entire city skyline. Clara Varela stood by the window, looking out at the sprawling city below, her arms crossed. Her expression was unreadable, but as soon as Eduardo stepped in, she turned, locking eyes with him. "You came," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Yeah," Eduardo said, still unsure what was happening. "I didn't really have much choice. You said." I didn't need to explain myself yesterday when you helped me, Clara interrupted. But I will now. Eduardo shifted uncomfortably, his hands cold with nerves. Clara gestured to the seat across from her desk. Sit, she said simply. Eduardo sat down, feeling the tension in the air, but Clara was already focused on him, her sharp green eyes studying him with an intensity that almost felt like a test. You helped me yesterday, she said slowly. Not just with a car. You gave me something that people in my position rarely get. Eduardo blinked, trying to piece together what she meant. A second chance, Clara continued, her voice softer now, but still full of authority. I was about to lose a deal worth millions if I had missed that meeting. What you did yesterday, that decision, it didn't just fix my car. It fixed my future. Eduardo's heart skipped a beat as her words sank in. That's why I'm offering you something more than a job, she said. I'm offering you a real opportunity. One you didn't even know you were capable of. Eduardo's breath caught in his throat as the weight of her words settled over him. Eduardo sat frozen in his seat, his mind struggling to process the unexpected turn of events. Clara Varela, the CEO of Varela Technologies, was offering him something more than just a job. She was offering him a chance, a real opportunity that could change his life in ways he couldn't have imagined when he first decided to help her with that flat battery. He tried to speak, but his throat felt dry, his words failing him. What was this? A joke? Was she testing him? He had spent years fighting for every scrap, every opportunity that came his way. Why would someone like her offer him anything, let alone a chance to work for one of the biggest tech firms in the country? Clara didn't seem to notice his hesitation. She slid a thick folder across the desk toward him, her gaze never leaving his face. I don't hand out favors, Eduardo, she said, her tone sharp and direct. You didn't just fix a car, you made a choice. You chose to help someone in need, despite the fact it cost you your shot at a job that might have changed your life. That's not something I see often in people. And that's why I'm offering you a chance to work here. Eduardo glanced down at the folder. The weight of it felt heavy, like the weight of everything he had ever worked for was wrapped up in that single moment. He didn't know what to say. He had never been handed anything in life, and the idea that Clara would offer him a real opportunity seemed almost too good to be true. Why me? He finally managed to ask, his voice rough with confusion. I didn't even finish the interview. I missed my shot. Clara's lips curved into a faint smile, but it wasn't one of amusement. It was knowing, almost as if she understood something he didn't. I'm not offering you a job because of what you missed. I'm offering it because of what you chose to do when most people wouldn't have. You showed something that's rare in this industry: integrity. You put someone else's needs above your own, even when you had everything to lose. That's why I see potential in you. Eduardo leaned back in his chair, still processing her words. He had never considered himself a saint. He had helped because it was the right thing to do. But could that one moment of kindness really change his life forever? Clara's voice broke through his thoughts. You have two options, Eduardo. You can walk out of here, go back to the life you've been living, and continue to struggle for every opportunity. Or you can take a chance on this on yourself. I'm offering you a real position here with real responsibility. You'll need to prove yourself. But if you do, it could be the start of something bigger than you ever imagined. The silence in the room was thick, almost suffocating. Eduardo's mind raced. Everything he had ever wanted, his shot at something better, was sitting right in front of him. But was he ready for this? Could he really step up to the challenge Clara was offering him? He glanced down at the folder again, the papers inside representing a future he had always dreamed of but never thought he would have. His palms were sweaty, his heart hammering in his chest, but deep down he knew the answer. Eduardo swallowed hard, his voice steady now. I'm in, he said, his words firm, almost as if he had made the decision long before he spoke them aloud. Clara's eyes flickered with approval, and for the first time, Eduardo saw a hint of warmth in her expression. Good. Welcome to Varela Technologies, Eduardo. She slid the folder toward him, and he took it with trembling hands. As he looked over the documents inside, Contract details, responsibilities, and expectations. He felt a mix of excitement and fear. This wasn't a handout. It wasn't pity. This was a chance he had earned, through his actions, not his resume. As Clara stood up and walked toward the window, her back turned to him, she spoke again. I don't give second chances, Eduardo. I give first chances. You've got one. Don't waste it. The weight of her words settled into his chest like a heavy truth. The life he had known, the struggle, the uncertainty, was behind him now. In front of him was a new path, one that would demand everything from him. And yet, for the first time, Eduardo felt a glimmer of hope. He stood up, adjusting his jacket and nodding to Clara. I won't let you down, he said, determination filling his voice. Clara turned, her eyes locking with his. For a moment, it felt like she was testing him once more, gauging his resolve. Then, without a word, she nodded, a silent acknowledgement that he had passed the first test. As Eduardo walked out of Clara's office, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. He was no longer the guy waiting for a chance. He was the guy who had been given one, and now it was up to him to make the most of it. He stepped into the elevator, the doors closing behind him. The city stretched out before him, full of possibilities. This wasn't the end of his journey. It was only the beginning. The next few days at Varela Technologies felt like a blur. Eduardo was thrust into the fast-paced world of corporate life, a world he had only glimpsed from the outside. The sleek glass walls of the building, the polished floors, and the confident strides of the employees made him feel like an outsider. But Clara had made it clear, he was no longer an outsider. He was part of the team now. His desk, unlike the cramped cubicles he had imagined, was a corner office overlooking the Manila skyline. It was spacious, modern, and completely intimidating. It made Eduardo feel even more out of place, surrounded by a team of highly skilled professionals who seemed to operate on a completely different level. The first few days were a whirlwind of meetings, orientations, and introductions. Clara didn't go easy on him. She didn't coddle him or waste time with unnecessary pleasantries. She made it clear that he had been given this chance because of one moment of selflessness, and now it was up to him to prove that he was worth it. At first, Eduardo struggled. He had been hired for a financial analyst position, but he had little corporate experience. The spreadsheets, projections, and complex reports were worlds apart from the numbers he had dealt with in his previous odd jobs. He often found himself staring at the columns, overwhelmed by the unfamiliarity of the data. But Clara didn't give him any room for self-doubt. If anything, she pushed him harder. Every report that crossed her desk had to be flawless, and Eduardo quickly learned that perfection was the standard. She didn't tolerate mistakes, not from anyone and certainly not from him. On the fourth day, Clara called him into her office again. Eduardo had been working late the past few nights, his eyes bleary from hours of staring at financial reports, trying to get everything just right. He walked into her office, trying to hide the exhaustion that was starting to take hold of him. Sit down, Eduardo, Clara said, her voice as sharp as always. She didn't even look up as she shuffled through some papers on her desk. Eduardo sat, trying not to fidget. He knew this meeting wasn't going to be easy. Clara finally looked up, her eyes piercing through him. You've been working hard, she said, her voice cold. But it's not enough. You're not meeting the expectations I set for you. Eduardo felt his stomach tighten. He had been doing everything he could, staying late, reading through documents and double-checking his work, but somehow it wasn't enough. I'm trying, he said, his voice quieter than he intended. I just don't have the experience yet. I need more time to catch up. Clara leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. I didn't give you a chance because of your experience, Eduardo. I gave you this opportunity because of your character. You showed me something rare, a willingness to help, to put someone else first. Now, I need to see that same drive in your work. If you want to stay here, you need to prove that you belong. Eduardo swallowed hard, his mind racing. Clara wasn't giving him any leeway. She wasn't interested in excuses. You have until Friday, Clara continued, her voice unwavering. I need a full financial analysis for the executive board meeting. I don't want any mistakes. This is your chance to show me what you're made of. Prove that you can handle the pressure." Eduardo nodded, his mind already racing with the thought of the task ahead. He could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him. He wasn't just working for a paycheck anymore. He was working to prove that he deserved to be there. The next few days were the hardest of his life. Eduardo barely slept, spending long hours in front of his computer, poring over every spreadsheet, analyzing every figure. His body felt drained, and his mind constantly raced, but he knew he couldn't stop now. By Friday morning, Eduardo had finished the presentation. He had double-checked the numbers, reworked some projections, and crafted a report that he hoped would meet Clara's impossible standards. His hands shook as he walked into the boardroom, carrying the thick file. The executives were already seated, their eyes trained on him as he set the folder down in front of them. The room was quiet, the tension palpable. Eduardo could feel their eyes on him, the silent judgment hanging in the air. His heart pounded in his chest as he began to speak. He stumbled over a few words at first, but then something shifted. The nerves that had gripped him started to fade, replaced by a determination he hadn't felt before. As he presented the analysis, he spoke with confidence, his voice steady, his hands no longer trembling. The numbers on the screen came alive as he explained the trends, the projections, and the impact they would have on the company's future. By the time he finished, the room was silent, the executives taking in what he had just presented. One of the senior executives, a middle-aged man with a stern face, leaned back in his chair and nodded slowly. "Well done, Eduardo," he said, his tone surprising Eduardo. "This is impressive." Clara, who had been watching from the back of the room, didn't say anything at first, but as the others began to murmur their approval, she finally spoke, her voice cutting through the room. "You've proven yourself, Eduardo," she said, her gaze unwavering. "This is what I expected from you." Eduardo felt a sense of relief wash over him, the pressure lifting. He had done it. He had earned her respect, and he had earned his place at Varela Technologies. As the meeting ended, Clara walked up to him. "You did good," she said, her voice softer than usual. "But don't get comfortable. This is just the beginning." Eduardo smiled, the weight of the past few days lifting off his shoulders. He had passed the test, and now he knew he was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed Eduardo's successful presentation felt like a new chapter in his life. For the first time since joining Varela Technologies, he felt like he belonged. The grueling hours, the endless revisions, and the pressure to perform had finally paid off. But even as the praise from his colleagues and the executives poured in, Eduardo knew this was just the beginning. Clara had set the bar high, and he couldn't afford to stop now. After the board meeting, Eduardo received a message from Clara. It was brief, but it spoke volumes. "Good job today. Don't get comfortable. Your real test begins now." Her words were like fuel to his fire. He wasn't about to rest on his laurels. Clara had already shown him that there were no shortcuts. The corporate world wasn't about luck or handouts. It was about hard work, resilience, and proving yourself every single day. And Eduardo was ready to prove he had what it took to thrive in this world. Over the next few weeks, Eduardo's transformation was evident. He tackled each project with an intensity and focus that he had never known before. He wasn't just learning on the job. He was actively seeking out challenges, taking the initiative, and pushing himself to grow. Every task, no matter how small, became an opportunity to prove his worth. His colleagues started noticing his work ethic, and even the most senior executives began to take him seriously. But despite his success, Eduardo still couldn't shake the feeling that Clara was watching him. Her expectations never wavered, and she was always one step ahead. At times, he felt like he was walking a tightrope, trying to balance the work demands with the pressure to always do better, to always be more than what he was the day before. One afternoon, Clara called him into her office again. Eduardo's stomach tightened. He had just completed a major project, and he knew this meeting wasn't about praise. It was about pushing him further. As he entered her office, Clara was already seated at her desk, her piercing green eyes fixed on him. There was no small talk, no pleasantries. She didn't waste time. "I need you to lead the next project," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's a major opportunity for the company, and I need someone who can handle the pressure." Eduardo blinked, momentarily taken aback. He had only been with the company for a few months, and now she was offering him the responsibility of leading a high-profile project? This was the ultimate test, the one he had been waiting for, but it also felt like an enormous challenge. He had never led a project of this scale before. "Are you sure?" he asked, trying to mask the doubt creeping into his voice. "I mean, I'm still learning a lot. I can't promise everything will go smoothly." Clara didn't flinch. "I didn't ask for perfection. I asked for results. You've proven you can deliver when it matters. Now I need to see how you handle responsibility. This project could be a game changer for the company. If you succeed, it could set the stage for your future here." Her words hit him hard. It wasn't just the project that was on the line, it was his future. This was the moment he had to rise above everything, to step up and lead like he had never led before. Eduardo took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the challenge before him. He nodded, the determination clear in his eyes. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady. "I won't let you down." Clara's gaze softened just for a moment, a flicker of something almost approving in her eyes. "Good. I'll be watching." That was all she said before turning back to her computer, dismissing him without another word. Eduardo left her office, the weight of his new responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. But as he walked back to his desk, he couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. This was his chance to prove once and for all that he was more than just someone who had caught a break. This was his moment to shine. The project was massive, involving cross-departmental coordination and complex strategic planning. Eduardo worked tirelessly, pulling in all the knowledge he had gained since joining Varela Technologies, collaborating with his team, and solving problems as they arose. Every late night, every early morning, every moment of stress and doubt pushed him to grow in ways he hadn't expected. The real test came when an unexpected obstacle threatened to derail the entire project. A key partnership fell through, and the deal that had seemed almost certain was suddenly in jeopardy. Eduardo was forced to make quick decisions, negotiating with stakeholders and recalibrating the entire strategy. The pressure was unbearable, but he remained calm, methodical, and focused. He stayed up for 2 nights straight, working alongside his team to find a solution. When the dust finally settled, the project was back on track, and even better than before. They had salvaged the partnership and created a new strategy that not only secured the deal but strengthened the company's position in the market. When Eduardo presented the final results to Clara, she didn't say much, but the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. She was impressed. "You did good, Eduardo," she said quietly, her voice almost approving. "You've earned your place here." And for the first time since he had walked into Varela Technologies, Eduardo allowed himself a smile. He had proven himself not just to Clara, not just to his colleagues, but to himself. This wasn't the end of his journey. It was the beginning of something much bigger. He had come a long way from that young man on a motorcycle, making a split-second decision to help a stranger. Now he was a leader, and he knew there was nothing standing in his way. Months had passed since Eduardo had taken on the project that had tested his abilities, and with each passing day, he grew more comfortable in his role at Varela Technologies. What once felt like an overwhelming pressure had transformed into a challenge he now welcomed. His team respected him, Clara had come to rely on him, and the executives began to take notice of his growing influence within the company. But there was still one thing Eduardo knew: he wasn't done yet. There was always a next step, another mountain to climb, and Clara's words still echoed in his mind. "Don't get comfortable." It was a crisp morning when Clara called him into her office again. Eduardo was familiar with the rhythm of these meetings. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. But this time there was something different in the air, something heavier. "Sit down," Clara said, motioning to the chair across from her. Eduardo did as instructed, but his mind raced. Was there another project? Another test? Clara didn't keep him waiting. "You've done well, Eduardo," she said, her tone measured but with a hint of approval. The company has benefited from your leadership, and you've proven yourself time and again. Eduardo nodded, grateful for the recognition. But he knew Clara wasn't one to flatter. There had to be more. Clara leaned forward, folding her hands on the desk. I've been watching your progress carefully. You've exceeded expectations in ways I didn't anticipate. And because of that, I'm offering you something that most people here would kill for. Eduardo's heart skipped a beat. What could she possibly be offering him now? He had already proven himself with the project, but Clara wasn't someone who gave away opportunities easily. I want you to lead our expansion into Southeast Asia, she continued, her gaze unwavering. This is a big move for the company, and I need someone who can not only manage it, but also drive it forward. Someone with vision, someone who understands what it takes to make bold decisions. That someone is you. The words hit him like a wave. Lead the company's expansion? The thought of overseeing such a massive initiative seemed surreal, but Clara's faith in him was clear. This was everything he had worked for, everything he had hoped would one day come to fruition. Are you sure? Eduardo asked, his voice tight with disbelief. I mean, this is a huge responsibility. I'm still learning. Clara raised a hand, cutting him off. You've already shown that you can handle the responsibility, Eduardo. What you lack in experience, you make up for in determination, vision, and the ability to think beyond the status quo. That's what this company needs right now. Eduardo took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had worked so hard to get here, to earn Clara's trust, to prove he wasn't just another underdog. He had made it. And now, this was the culmination of everything. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about the future of the company, about making decisions that would shape its path for years to come. I'm in, Eduardo said, his voice steady now. I won't let you down. Clara nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. I know you won't. The rest of the day passed in a blur as Clara briefed Eduardo on the details of the expansion. He would be heading to the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand, coordinating with local partners and overseeing the launch of new projects in each country. The stakes were higher than anything he had faced before, but for the first time he felt ready. The weight of the responsibility didn't overwhelm him. It energized him. That night, Eduardo lay in bed, his mind racing with excitement and anticipation. This was the moment he had always dreamed of. He wasn't just part of the company anymore. He was leading its future. He had come so far from the young man on the street, making a choice that would change his life. Now, his decisions would shape the company's destiny. The next morning, as he packed his bags for his first business trip abroad, Eduardo felt a sense of pride he had never known before. He had started out as just another guy trying to make it, and now, he was at the helm of something much bigger than himself. He had made the right choice when he helped Clara all those months ago, and now he was about to take on the world. The road ahead would be difficult, full of challenges and obstacles. But Eduardo was no longer afraid of the unknown. He had already faced it and come out on top. Now, it was time to lead, to step into the future with confidence, and to prove once again that he was more than just a man who took a chance. He was a man who created his own destiny. And as he boarded the plane to Southeast Asia, the horizon stretched before him, full of limitless possibilities. He was ready. Months had passed since Eduardo took the reins of the Southeast Asia expansion for Varela Technologies. His first few months in the role had been a whirlwind of travel, meetings, and late nights. The pressure was immense, and every decision he made had the potential to either propel the company forward or set it back. But with every challenge, Eduardo grew more confident, more decisive. He had learned to think not just as an employee, but as a leader, someone whose choices shaped the future of the company and its place in the market. The expansion into the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand had been a difficult but successful venture. Eduardo had negotiated with local partners, navigated complex regulations, and ensured the company's services were tailored to meet the unique needs of each market. The results spoke for themselves. Increased market share, a growing customer base, and stronger relationships with international partners. Eduardo had done what many thought was impossible. He had led the company into a new era. But Clara's voice still echoed in his mind. Don't get comfortable. The bar was always being raised, and Eduardo knew he wasn't finished yet. There was always more to prove, new heights to reach. One afternoon, Eduardo found himself standing in the boardroom at Varela Technologies, preparing for his final presentation to Clara and the executive team. He was about to report on the full impact of the Southeast Asia expansion, sharing how far they had come and what their future in the region could look like. He had spent the past few weeks poring over numbers, analyzing market trends, and preparing a strategic vision for the company's next big step. As Clara entered the room, she gave him a nod of acknowledgement, but there was no smile, no congratulations. He had long since learned that Clara's approval wasn't handed out easily, and that's exactly what made him strive harder. "Let's see what you've got, Eduardo," she said, taking her seat at the head of the table. Eduardo stood at the front of the room, his mind racing as he began his presentation. He talked about the market penetration, the successful launch of new services, and the partnerships they had cultivated across 3 countries. He didn't just want to highlight the victories. He wanted to show them the long-term impact his leadership would have on the company's future. He outlined strategies for further growth, discussing new potential markets and the innovative ways Varela Technologies could continue to expand. The room was silent as Eduardo finished. He had laid everything on the line, his ideas, his vision, and the future of Varela Technologies in Southeast Asia. He knew this presentation would be a turning point, not just for the company, but for him personally. Clara was the first to speak, her sharp gaze fixed on him. "You've exceeded my expectations, Eduardo," she said, her voice steady but with a flicker of something warmer than usual. "You didn't just lead an expansion, you've transformed how we approach new markets. This is exactly what I needed to see." The words hit Eduardo harder than he expected. After all the years of struggle, the late nights, and the doubts he had faced, Clara's approval was more than just a professional milestone. It was a personal victory. He had done it, not just for himself, but for the company and everyone who had believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. "Thank you, Clara," Eduardo replied, his voice steady, though there was a hint of emotion behind the words. "But this is just the beginning. There's still so much more to do." Clara nodded. "I know," she said, "and I'm counting on you to keep pushing the envelope. But for now, I think it's time for a celebration." The rest of the team in the room broke into applause, and Eduardo allowed himself a moment to take it all in. He had risen from that young man on a motorcycle unsure of his future to a leader who had successfully guided Varela Technologies into one of the fastest-growing regions in the world. He had earned his place at the table, and he had earned the trust of one of the most formidable CEOs in the industry. That evening, the company held a small celebration in Eduardo's honor. Clara, as always, remained reserved, but there was a look of approval in her eyes whenever she glanced his way. Eduardo knew that even though this chapter had closed, the next challenge was already waiting. There was more to be done, more to achieve. And yet, as he stood in the middle of the celebration, surrounded by colleagues who had become friends, Eduardo couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. From a young man struggling to make ends meet to a leader with the power to shape the future of a global company. It was a journey he never could have predicted. But that was the beauty of it. Life, much like business, wasn't a straight path. It was full of unexpected twists and turns, moments of doubt and decision, and the courage to keep moving forward, no matter the obstacles. Eduardo had learned that the hardest battles were often the ones that led to the greatest rewards. As the evening drew to a close and Eduardo made his way home, he thought back to the day he helped Clara by the side of the road. He never could have known that simple act of kindness would be the catalyst for everything that had followed. Now, standing at the top of his career, Eduardo was more than just a man who had found success. He was a man who had built his legacy one choice at a time. And this was only the beginning.